us today. For those that are new to us, CleanStart has been helping clean tech entrepreneurs and innovators bring their ideas to life here in Sacramento, California since 2005. What we do is we connect founders, builders, and operators with the knowledge, relationships, and community they need to actually get things done. Today's conversation is part of our Perspective webinar series, practical founder-friendly discussions focused on what actually matters when you're building a company in the clean energy space. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, SMUD, Chico Start, Fresno State, the Wet Center there, River City Bank, Witten Law, and Baker Tilly. Their support is what makes events like this possible, and we're grateful for their continued commitment to growing the clean energy ecosystem in our region. Today, we're tackling a question that comes up constantly for founders and operators in the storage space. How do energy storage companies actually make money in California? The rules are complicated, the relationships with utilities can be tricky, and whether you're deploying grid scale batteries or behind the meter systems, the path to a sustainable business model is not always obvious. So we're going to break all of that down today, including how California's energy regulations take shape, who storage companies are actually working with, and what founders need to know about contracts and where there's room to negotiate. I'll be joined by CleanStart co-founder Gary Simon, and we're thrilled to have as our guest someone who lives and breathes this stuff every day, Seth Hilton, who's a partner in energy development and heads the energy industry group at Stoel Rives, one of the leading energy law firms in the country. Seth works with clean energy and battery storage companies across California, helping them understand the regulatory landscape, navigate utility relationships, and turn innovative technology into successful business. So, Seth, welcome. We're really glad to have you here.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Appreciate it.
Why don't you kind of just start off by kind of, I guess, laying the landscape of what Stoel Rives does in the energy storage space?
Sure. Yeah. And thanks for the great introduction. I think you gave a great kind of summary of where I fit into Stoel Rives. And maybe I'll start with our larger energy practice first. We do we like to say kind of soup to nuts in terms of resource development, including energy storage. So we cover everything from permitting and land use issues when you're building the project to what I do, which is California regulatory work associated with potential opportunities and advantage for energy storage, kind of rulings coming out of the California Public Utilities Commission, Energy Commission, dealing with interconnection and transmission issues at the CAISO. We also negotiate offtake agreements for energy storage. My partner, Jennifer Martin, has done that for almost as long as I've been doing regulatory work, so about 25 years. So she's an expert in terms of negotiating with utilities. We also do financing for utility scale projects. And for behind the meter projects, we do a lot of the same work and recently been doing a lot of work associated with kind of working through incentives and opportunities for behind the meter storage as well.
Last week we had a battery storage meetup, which featured companies from the Sacramento region that are making batteries, deploying them behind the meter, and also one company, Empower Energy, who's had success deploying batteries actually in Australia because some of the framework for helping them scale and get a return to the people that have installed batteries works a little bit better there. So as far as what, a battery company needs to kind of first think about when it comes to generating revenue, what are kind of, I guess, the first concerns that they need to think about in order to try to bring revenue kind of in, I guess, as quickly as possible? Move the innovation or the ideation point to the we're getting money in the door steps together.
I think from my perspective, a lot of what I deal with, at least on utility scale projects, has to do with procurement that's required by the Public Utilities Commission for load serving entities that are subject to PUC jurisdiction. So we're talking about investor-owned utilities like PG&E in Southern California, Edison, community choice aggregators, which have grown significantly over the years, and energy service providers, which provide direct access. And they're subject to a couple of procurement obligations, primarily associated around resource adequacy capacity. And really, these procurement obligations are really focused on the project's capacity. And the procurement requirements generally require longer term contracts, which is great for in terms of obtaining a revenue stream for your project. So usually we're talking about resource adequacy or reliability capacity that needs to meet certain requirements, or procurement in the integrated resource planning process, IRP process at the PUC, to meet those obligations for load serving entities. And that's really where we saw the recent order for requiring procurement of 6 gigawatts. So for utility scale, I think it's really figuring out how you can obtain a long-term contract through those utility solicitations. That's going to be the key. And then, stacking the additional revenue associated potentially with energy ancillary services, other opportunities. But really, it's the capacity that's procured pursuant to these programs that are key.
Mhm.
So, Seth, when you look over these regulatory proceedings, and I used to represent a big company participating in the proceedings, um, and learned that computers actually don't make you use less paper. I think they make you use more. Um, but what are some of the outstanding issues? What are people not seeing in the PUC rules that they wanted to see? Can you give us some perspective on the parties that are dissatisfied with where we are? What it is they think is lacking?
Yeah, I think one of the current challenges that the Public Utilities Commission is dealing with a bit, which can have a real impact on energy storage companies, is looking at the energy requirements to charge these battery energy storage resources. And what obligations do they need to put on load serving entities to ensure that the energy is there to charge these battery energy storage resources? And the framework for reliability capacity for resource adequacy changed slightly a number of years ago, and they actually put in a charging sufficiency obligation that load serving entities now have to show they have the energy to charge those energy storage resources. But with regard to the recent procurement in the IRP, the 6 gigawatts of procurement that were ordered, the commission initially put a limit on the amount of energy storage that could be procured to meet those requirements due to concerns about sufficient energy to charge those resources. And they were going to cap it at 50%. They didn't do that due to some significant resistance to that idea. But that's an example of one of the potential hurdles here that energy storage recently experienced, and was managed to get ahead of a bit with the PUC. I would say the other issue that we're in the midst of struggling with a bit is that energy storage that meets certain requirements. There's a 4-hour requirement to qualify for resource adequacy capacity, um, have their niche, but we need to explore how we're going to value long duration energy storage that has durations longer than 4 hours. We certainly need, the commission's recognizing that, we certainly need those resources, but we need to further explore how we value those resources in these various commission processes and properly incent the procurement of those resources. And one of the things the commission did in its recent order is shift from limiting energy storage procurement to actually requiring up to 25% of the procurement be long duration energy storage, 8 hours or more. So again, that's a good step in the right direction, but I think there's more to be done there.
Well, let me ask this because I mean there are other ISOs across the country and other places, and I see laundry lists of things that they will pay storage operators compensation for, like
Mm,
voltage support, frequency support. Some of that comes down to dealing with what's called reactive power,
mm,
and all sorts of features which storage can do by injecting and withdrawing from the grid in order to balance it. I don't see the commission going into a lot of those areas at this point, and providing compensation to the people that provide storage, either at a grid level or behind the meter. Has there been any discussion, or do you see any direction at the PUC as to how they want to handle that?
Yeah, I would say, looking at a historical perspective, long term, there was a lot of initial um, efforts at the Public Utilities Commission when they were initially starting energy storage procurement to kind of quantify the values that could be provided by energy storage, to make sure it was valued appropriately, to make sure it was incented in the right way. That, as you said, we haven't seen a lot of activity around that at the PUC recently. Would say the venue for those types of questions and issues has really shifted to the California Independent System Operator and the energy and ancillary services markets that the CAISO provides. So that is really probably the more appropriate venue at this point to potentially expand the opportunities for energy storage and other types of resources.
Well, there's a bit of an overlap between how storage is treated and how virtual power plants are treated, and that's a separate docket. But I'm sure since you cover most of the things that are going on at the PUC, you're aware of what they're rewarding with VPPs and what direction that's taking. What do you see as overlaps or differences in what the PUC is doing with VPP resources versus storage?
Yeah, I think what I've seen, what we've kind of been evaluating recently for a number of clients is kind of some of VPPs or demand response opportunities, where there's potential opportunities for the owners of these resources to obtain advantages under their utility bills for providing, potentially virtual power plant services or demand response when called upon to do so. I think the challenge is always at the PUC to maintain and expand those programs. So I know, for example, there's a program some of my clients have been looking at that recently ceased to exist, at least for San Diego Gas and Electric, and there's potential risks for that program longer term at PG&E. So it's always kind of a back and forth of creating these opportunities, ensuring the opportunities that are created actually fit the real world. I think historically the PUC has in some cases created a program with the intent to incentivize energy storage or other types of virtual power plants or other types of resources, and the structure just doesn't work. And we've seen these programs pop up and then nobody participates because the structure doesn't work, and then they kind of disappear. So it's a bit of an ongoing struggle at the PUC to create these programs, maintain these programs, and make sure they operate in a way that you know recognizes how things operate in the real world.
Yeah, no, it evolves fairly quickly. Um, I mean, there's a thing called, I think it's now the California Solar and Storage Association. I don't know, are they a party in the PUC proceeding?
Yeah, we have a number of organizations that are active at the PUC representing various types of resources. I would say the one that I would think of that's specifically focused on energy storage that has been very active both at the Public Utilities Commission and at the CAISO is the California Energy Storage Alliance, or CISA.
Mhm.
Flynn started that organization. It's been a while now, but Stoel has been a member for a while. And they have been really, I would say, very instrumental, especially in the early years, in carving out a place for storage and continuing to ensure that there's opportunities for all types of energy storage. They were, for example, very active in pushing back in the proposed limitation for the recent 6 gigawatts procurement that would be limited for energy storage. They were active in pushing back and were successful at the end of the day. Them and a number of other parties.
Oh, that's interesting. So, I mean, they're pulling together a number of parties then and trying to have a consistent participation in the PUC, I would imagine.
Yeah, yeah, and they cover a range of proceedings. So a lot of what we've just recently been talking about really focuses on utility scale
Yeah.
resources. So there's certain CISA certainly engaged at that level, but they also focus on behind the meter resources, it's like demand response, distributed energy resource opportunities, and that type of thing. So more working both areas. So
Well, in terms of other things that storage provides, they're quick response resources compared to starting up a thermal plant or um, and sometimes other resources that can't quite change that quickly. And it used to be there was a under 10-minute um, reward. If you could respond more quickly than that, then the time frame got shorter and shorter. Batteries can respond in seconds. They don't respond that great in milliseconds. Is there any reward for the responsiveness time in how people are compensated for storage?
Yeah, I would say that there's ancillary services that can be provided that recognize some of those fast response attributes of energy storage, for which energy storage can be compensated in the CAISO markets. So I think that's ancillary services in the CAISO markets is kind of that niche where you get compensated for that.
Interesting. So, I mean, so the CAISO essentially establishes these ancillary markets. Is any of that reviewed by the PUC, or is that just a total different function?
That's a total. So the energy and ancillary services markets created by the California Independent System Operator is subject to federal jurisdiction, not CPUC jurisdiction. So the CPUC works very closely with the CAISO and is actively involved in stakeholder proceedings where they kind of work out these various issues. But ultimately, the regulatory authority is with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
So
Interesting.
I kind of have a
Mhm.
question, at least on
Mhm.
you mentioned valuing long-term storage and then trying to, the ancillary services around things. I know there's, one of the companies, Greg Connolly's in the chat, Cora, that, they have the goal of getting a whole bunch of doing, business to consumer, selling a lot of these batteries to the consumer, a lot like Sunrun,
Mhm.
and then kind of having these grid edge sort of services that they put together and then being able to sell to the utility. Now, it's kind of my understanding that, that compared to, a utility scale energy project is probably not seen as necessarily as reliable as a utility scale one because you have to rely on all these, small different nodes on it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's seen as kind of, I guess, inherently a little bit more risky being a, kind of a new kind of technology market on it. But I kind of think back to, a couple years ago when we had a heat wave in California, and I had, I think, 6 people from SMUD call me asking me to tell people to, turn off their power and not use it as much. And I just imagine the cost of that demand response program of physically calling people versus, these a lot of these distributed kind of resources on it. How do you kind of like, where can you kind of negotiate more value in these kind of distributed systems, or where is there space to try to increase the value to try to get them on parity with a, utility scale storage system?
Yeah, I think in developing those types of resources, there's kind of two issues you need to deal with. One is the opportunities under various programs for demand response opportunities or virtual power plant opportunities. So that could be either directly in the CAISO markets or working through the PUC for obtaining the benefits associated with those particular programs. And then a lot of the issues need to be worked with the consumers that are actually procuring these resources, right, and kind of stacking up the benefits to those consumers for behind the meter resources to encourage the actual procurement of the batteries. Participating in these types of demand response or virtual power plant programs can be part of the benefit associated with that, but there's certainly other benefits as well. I think for a lot of the behind the meter resources that I've been dealing with, a lot of the kind of legal and regulatory issues we work with them on are kind of figuring out what other incentive programs can be used to reduce the cost of behind the meter resources. So, like self-generation incentive program is SCHIP is a good example of that. Build program at the Energy Commission, kind of working through those incentive opportunities that reduce the costs of those resources, and then certainly the reliability aspects associated with that, right? Backup power generation as well as a key aspect for these behind the meter resources.
So,
Do you mind if I ask a follow-up,
Mm,
Thomas?
mm.
Sure, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah. Hey, Seth. Thomas is advocating for us with with some of these questions.
Yeah.
So I'll give you kind of, I think, a more in your wheelhouse question. And as example from one of the utilities that we're talking to right now, they're looking to do a front of the meter, 100,000 plus battery deployment. Each battery being at least 8 kilowatt hours, so we can hit the 4 hour resource adequacy
Hmm.
threshold that you were referencing.
Hmm.
And in terms of like structuring the agreement, obviously they're trying to peg us to current kind of natural gas rates, which we're pretty confident or are going to continue to climb over time for at least a 15-year contract. So essentially we deploy the batteries, then we would lease usage of the batteries to them. So even though we're a scheduling coordinator, slash
Hmm.
VPP, they're better at it than we are because
Hmm.
they are a utility. They're going to, manage the markets better than we can.
Hmm.
Have you structured any deals like that? Because it essentially the way we're trying to structure it is we won't be as price competitive on a per kilowatt hour basis as like dropping a mega pack of,
Okay.
let's say, this amount of batteries we're talking about is 1.6 gigawatts worth of batteries that we'd be deploying.
Hmm.
Deploying all of that in the same spot is cheaper on a per kilowatt hour basis. But they've done the math on getting that power through transmission into all of the specific stress circuits, main feeders, transformers, et cetera. The infrastructure upgrades they would have to spend on to be able to deploy that in the way they're looking for. It's actually cheaper for them to drop batteries within the circuits at the homeowner's level. So wondering, like, in those type of contracts, do you guys like tie it to some sort of like EIA or other energy market peg where, if the lowest bidding energy price that they're bidding on goes up, we're able to charge them more money in the contract? Like, how would you like approach the overall pricing structure, tying it to some sort of market
Yeah.
force?
Yeah. So yeah, I can see the benefits here of kind of more distributed resources. You're saying like the transmission upgrade costs for dropping 1.6 gigawatts just too much to kind of pencil out for the utilities. Yeah.
Yeah, each
It
substation is 6 million, for example. Each
Yeah.
transformer is 500 grand. Like, you start stacking those up across these large residential deployments, it's actually more expensive to do utility scale deployments than it is deploying within the circuits themselves.
Yeah. So, in terms of pricing structure, unfortunately, so my colleague Jennifer Martin deals with these types of transactions all the time and has a much better idea than I would of kind of the pricing structures that she's seen. I know she's done virtual power plant arrangements. I know with looking at other commercial entities and structuring those with entities other than utilities, I think she may have done some deals with utilities as well. So I apologize, but we need to check with her and kind of see what she's seen historically and where the opportunities might be.
Makes sense. And then if I can get one more question in,
Yeah.
to dive deeper on Gary's kind of thought process around these kind of ancillary services, have you
Mhm.
guys ever structured contracts with CalISO or any of the utilities directly for, I think coordinating inverters was more difficult in the age before AI, but now we're able to do like pretty sophisticated regression to be able to see, hey, Thomas and these 40,000 people that look exactly like Thomas just sit on their batteries at 100% because they're in a kind of a low blackout area and they aren't able to interconnect, type thing. It's one of the issues that Tesla even has is they've got, hundreds of thousands of power walls that get filled up to 100% and then just sit there, which seems to be why California is trying to regulate in load shifting requirements, essentially.
W-
So, have you seen any markets where people have actually started getting compensated for those type of support services like they do in Australia or other markets?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of places where you could potentially move the needle in terms of incentivizing these distributed batteries to actually participate. Um, and I think it's at a couple at the Public Utilities Commission, it's kind of demand response programs, where you could develop a program which would incentivize that. I don't think the PUC has necessarily done all it can in terms of incentivizing participation. But if I was looking to carve out a specific program that would be helpful in that regard, I would go to the PUC and work with the utilities to see if we could carve something out there in terms of providing a benefit. In terms of ancillary services with the CAISO, that's probably a little more tricky, especially if you're talking about smaller distributed resources. And
Mhm.
that would really involve creating a general ancillary service that the CAISO would see the benefit for in terms of operating the transmission grid, sufficient that it would compensate for that and go to FERC and get approved to actually compensate for that. So I would see that as a little more of a regulatory challenge as opposed to incentivizing this through demand response programs at the PUC.
Got it. So you would essentially build a business case with the business, build a model, maybe bring in a utility and or an ISO, and then approach the PUC with, hey, we could. I'm just spitballing how we would actually change the regulation, and at that point you would approach the PUC and say, hey, demand response is 10 days a year in September. Great, but we can do all these additional things with these gigawatts of load that are just sitting around
Yeah.
type thing.
Yeah, I think I would create a business case and lay out where the opportunities are for the utility, and then for the commission generally. Then we could certainly explore under existing demand response programs whether there were any opportunities there. I think I would start there, and then look at, to the extent you need a tweak to a demand response program to really recognize the benefit of what you're providing. Then you can work with the PUC and the utility potentially to get that recognized, and maybe work directly with the utility where they procure this and then get it approved through the PUC for the benefit that it provides without creating a whole separate program. Just going through a procurement with the IOU there might be an opportunity there as well.
I
Okay.
have a question. So on kind of the time frame of this, if if you're starting a company and if you want to kind of be in this battery space,
Mhm.
um, you're going out, you're fundraising, you're trying to bring money in so that you can deliver on a company. What type of time frames should you be practically thinking about to prepare for when it comes to working on these contracts or working with the CPUC to get something out there? Because you have investors that are like, "Hey, I want my return, yesterday," and then you
Mhm.
have the practical realities of a hard tech and a regulated space. What
Yeah.
type of kind of like time frame should someone be thinking about?
Yeah, they would vary depending on kind of what niche you're going after. I think the overall would be it's going to take way longer than you think usually, right? I mean,
Mhm.
if you're talking about development in the utility space in front of the meter where you need to interconnect that resource. In terms of development timeline, interconnection is a real challenge. Takes years to work through that process, right? If you're talking about behind the meter, uh, less of an issue if you are working within an existing program. If you're talking like what we were just talking about with Greg, like creating a program, that can be really challenging. If you can get the PUC's attention, they can work through that. There's an existing proceeding or something where they're considering that. You can work through that, maybe in 6 months or a year, probably more like a year. Or it can take many years of working with the PUC and pushing on them, or working with utilities to get them to recognize the benefits of whatever you're trying to provide to them.
Uh, Jeff Bush asked a question in the chat that I think is pretty salient because for years, I mean, there's this whole duck curve that has happened by rooftop solar
Mhm.
and also utility scale solar. And it seems like the utilities and CPUC have had like the ability to like turn a throttle on solar pretty well over the years. I guess it has taken, over 20 years,
Mhm.
but what do is the same throttle not really available to them because just of the complexity of how battery resources would be used, or is there something else kind of stopping them from doing that?
I think I would say there has been attempts by the PUC to turn up the throttle here and recognize the benefits of energy storage as it relates to the duck curve. And I say where you see this development is in the net energy metering program, right, which is a key part of why we have so much solar on the system, right? There are huge benefit provided uh, for behind the meter solar under the net energy metering program, and it resulted in a ton of solar being developed in California. And then a number of years ago, the commission was concerned about cost shift associated with the benefits provided under net energy metering. And concerned about exactly what you're talking about. We're getting a ton of solar on the system. Um, and we need to kind of manage this duck curve to ensure that the energy is available at peak instead of, middle of the day. So we want more energy storage. And the net billing tariff, the kind of the NIM 3.0, was intended expressly to incentivize additional procurement of energy storage. A lot of issues with that program. A lot of people weren't happy with that change, but that was really the commission's express intent, among other things, to address the cost shift and to incentivize energy storage to deal with those issues.
Got a question from Mark because could you comment on the future of remat programs and storage? REMAT.
Yeah. I haven't looked at the renewable market adjusting tariff. I know years ago I worked with a number of entities that were trying to get that to a space where it was functional, and it never quite got to a point where the pricing kind of and the opportunities kind of worked out, at least for the clients that I had been working with. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at this recently, but the impression I had is there wasn't much opportunity there, and wasn't much of a future. I'd be curious to see, to hear whether others think there's potential opportunities under remat. There was a bit of activity over the years there, but a lot of the clients I worked with didn't really see the opportunity with that program.
Okay. Another question we have is kind of going back to the valuing of all this. Like, it just kind of sounds like it's I don't want to say drawn out, but like, a complicated, detailed process that revolves around working with both federal and state agencies to figure out, what is the value of longer duration storage and short ones, and that building programs that work together on these. But one question I see, or part of Ari's question that I see there that I'm kind of interested about, is there areas where data is kind of lacking on understanding the value of energy storage, or is it something that we have the data, we just need to get it into the CPUC, into the federal hands so that a program can be made to help, I guess, communicate the value um, to utilities and ISOs?
I think, and this may be because I'm involved in the regulatory space, but I tend to think the challenges are less gathering the data to make the case for energy storage, and more kind of regulatory lag in terms of developing the programs that keeping properly incentivize and recognize the value of energy storage. That can really be the challenge. So you can bring the data to the PUC. You can say, hey, look, there's a real benefit here in this particular niche. You should recognize it, create a program that incentivizes it. It takes, a year or 2 or 3 to get that program in place. And then there's always the risk that once it's in place, it doesn't quite function as intended because you had, a few too many cooks in the kitchen, or, you know, the incentives weren't structured right, and then it may take a few more years to get it structured appropriately, that type of thing. So that's really where I see the challenge.
Now I've got a question because since you've mentioned
Yeah.
that, you're someone who works on the regulatory side of the values of this and working with the CPUC, one of the questions that we get a lot when we talk about like, hey, it's working over here in Australia. There's this similar system that's set up, in London that seems to be working really well. Um, so people are like, well, why don't we just, throw it all away and copy what they have?
Mhm.
What are some of like the risks for that their systems might have versus their regulatory systems have versus ours? And have you seen things that we should push to try to adopt or integrate into ours, and ones that hey, that sounds cool but might be actually really risky?
Yeah, I
Try to show
think
my
that
dog there. Sorry.
the challenge, I think the challenge really is, I mean, you can look at other jurisdictions and go, man, that program really works in that particular jurisdiction. But you're talking about a completely different regulatory structure, right? That's been set up. And the challenge really is, I think, for California to take the regulatory structure we have in place and incrementally add to it. We can't, taking everything out, throwing it out, and coming up with a completely new system takes far longer than figuring out where there's particular points where, if we move the needle a little bit here in terms of this incentive program, it may not work as well as it works in Australia, but we've moved the needle a little bit, and we've provided some additional benefits. And just as kind of a cautionary note, I would say, in terms of tossing out a regulatory structure and coming up with a new one, California recently adopted a new resource adequacy framework, right? The slice of day framework that was kind of a really a fundamental change to RA, and the length of time that took, and the years and years and years of workshops and kind of incremental decisions before it finally got in place and got started. And then once it got started, the need to kind of tweak things to make sure it worked, a process we're still working on, in significant ways, as kind of a cautionary tale in terms of, hey, let's get rid of this and wholesale adopt what they're doing somewhere else. It's challenging.
So there's a baby in that bathwater, you're saying?
Yeah, there is somewhere, hopefully.
Yeah, well, that brings me back to one of the things that I've always worried about in any of these markets where you're trying to make um, changes that reward you for what's really a dynamic process in the market. Regulatory agencies, negotiations with utilities tend not to deal with that too well. Um, there's questions of balancing equities, fairness to all the ratepayers. That's why things take a long time. And the essence of what we're talking about here in providing some of these benefits back into the system is you're arbitraging a difference, and your presence in the market will change the value of that arbitrage over time.
Mm,
And that's one of the things that blocking in on the old style net energy metering
mhm.
just ignored. And that's how things got so messed up on that. Um, but I don't see, and unless you have a different view on it, so that negotiating party by party with the utility um, to get a more dynamic pricing system is very workable either. So it seems like we're stuck always being suboptimal because of the sort of way that the rules change. It's like trying to change the path of a brontosaurus, and a lot of things get crushed on the way. So I don't know whether CalISO is going to be um, more nimble in this, or whether something can work out. But you know, if we begin pricing according to the value of storage on individual circuits, wow, that gets complicated. And, neighbors on the other side of town are compensated differently than this place over here. That just seems like that's going to create a lot of upset people.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a hard one for me to try to figure out what do you do about it. And so obviously what the regulatory system does is suboptimize, and just try to do what brings the most benefit to the most people. But um, and I mean, Jeff, you're in the middle of some of this. Greg's in the middle of a lot of it. But Seth, from your perspective in dealing with how society is trying to be fair on all this, do you see any bright lights out there that says, "Oh, we've got a much better way of doing this"? I hate the idea of just using what's emerged in a foreign country because a lot of the things aren't the same. But that sure is a popular comment that's made in these proceedings.
Yeah, I guess in terms of bright lights or advantages, what I would say is California slowly, but California has definitely made significant advancements in terms of how it looks at energy storage, how it compensates energy storage, how it incentivizes energy storage. I was involved in the regulatory proceeding way back when we had the Commissioner Florio was involved in this proceeding, whether anybody remembers him, but the first energy storage system was procured in this early, um, what they call long-term procurement plan proceeding years and years and years ago. And it was, 50 megawatt capacity, and they're actually procured energy storage. And I remember that moment. It was kind of a significant threshold. And yet you look at now where we are, at least in terms of in front of the meter storage, right? Utility scale storage in CAISO, we've got over 13 gigawatts of storage that's now operating on the system. The, the California Public Utilities Commission, in planning what resources it needs in the future, is estimating that it needs, a significant amount of additional energy storage to be procured by the load serving entities. And they're going to continue to do that, including in response to 6 gigawatt procurement. So there are a lot, it may not be optimal, but there are a lot of opportunities, I think, for utility scale storage and for behind the meter storage. Some of it is kind of working through the various programs that may apply to your resource, figuring out how you stack the various revenue streams that are available to you, and create something that will actually work. And I think the current structure is sufficient to create a significant amount of opportunity both for behind the meter and for utility scale storage. That doesn't mean we don't need to make changes, and we can continue to try and move the needle in the regulatory process. But I really do think there's some significant opportunities here going forward for energy storage under the current structures.
All
So,
right, that's a good wrap up point, Thomas.
okay. There's other questions in the chat, uh, which I think are actually going to be addressing in future discussions about data centers and how they're going to impact the grid. So I'd say make sure that you stay tuned for those ones, because it is a whole can of worms there.
It
So
It it is. Sorry, I don't mean to finish your close off, but a lot of regulatory proceedings going on, how figuring out how we're going to procure for data centers. And part of that 6 gigawatts that they ordered to procure recently is driven by data center development in PG&E's service territories. So there's a lot going on there. It's an interesting topic.
Yeah, and Jeff has raised the point that maybe if you internalize that in facilities adjacent to data centers, you sort of make it a little bit easier to be compensated appropriately than trying to deal with how it affects the entire grid. So a lot of creativity to come.
Yeah, and backup. The data centers need backup energy, and a lot of them are looking at gas. So where are the opportunity, right? And a lot of resistance to that for a lot of reasons. And so where can you create opportunities for energy storage to provide that benefit that data centers are clearly looking for? So.
Yeah,
and I will give it Peter Mackin a second to say he's our resident grid guy, to ask his question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, Thomas, actually,
More of
it's
a comment, right?
a comment always. I don't have a lot of questions. But the issue that Gary was raising earlier, like if you have a bunch of distributed resources on the, like say battery storage on the grid, and distribution feeders, and they're paying, their value is different. You can actually still make that fair, right? Because the ISO, they have energy hubs basically where the market price, even though it's an LMP where they pay the generators different amounts based on exactly where they are and how much value they have, the customers are only paying a single price. And so you could do the same thing with energy storage on the distribution. You say, okay, well, you're going to get this price, for your, and then you get a capacity, but of course your capacity price probably won't be changing. It's only the energy and the ancillary services you actually use. And then, some people will get more money because they're used more often because that feeder has more problems, but their compensation per amount that they provide is the same. So you could do something like that, and I think that would be fair. It's not easy to figure out how to do that, of course, but there's methods, there's ways.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why we have people like Seth at Stoel Rives and his energy team, which I put a link to them in the grid because he mentioned, or into the chat because he mentioned them a couple times, that he has, experts that help work on different sorts, I guess, of contracts and projects on that. So I want to thank Seth for joining us today. Round of
Well, thanks.
applause from him on that. Um, and this is exactly the kind of conversation that we love having here at CleanStart. Practical, honest, and hopefully useful if you're in the trenches of building or operating these energy storage devices. So, Seth, thank you for spending and sharing your expertise with us today. Your knowledge
Really
on the
enjoyed it.
regulatory and
Thank you.
commercial questions is invaluable. So, yeah, thank you. Um, and it sounds like some of our founders and operators got a lot out of it. So make sure that if you want to learn more, and make sure to reach out to Seth. You can connect with him and find him on Stoel Rives' site and through the link that I had there. And let's build things towards this 6 gigawatts of power that we need. And of course, I want to thank our sponsors. It doesn't happen without them. If you get a chance, go check them out. Thank you for supporting us and investing into this community. And also, we've got lots of upcoming events. So today's conversation is useful to you. There is more coming from us. You're going to be able to connect with clean tech entrepreneurs and the people, knowledge, and communities you need to succeed, including the upcoming grid meetup, which has someone from CAISO, the principal of enterprise information technology, AI, data, and analytics architecture at CAISO. So a very knowledgeable person on the data centers. You can find CleanStart at cleanstart.org. You can follow us on LinkedIn, where we're very active. So please subscribe and follow along. And thank you for coming today.
Yeah,
And with that,
absolutely.
I'm going to end the live feed. Yeah.
Great. And Greg, what I get out of this is build a bigger network operations center for all your millions of customers. It's going to get more complicated.
Love it. Thanks, Seth. Appreciate it.
All right.